There's something they don't expect when they disrespect you or lose interest, your silence. They expect a reaction. They expect begging. They expect to be chased. But the moment you do the one thing they never saw coming, walk away without a word, you trigger a shift in power so deep it unsettles their nervous system. This isn't about games, it's about self-respect. Because the people who thought they could violate your worth or treat your presence like it was disposable only learn when it's gone. And not in a loud, dramatic exit, but in a calm withdrawal that leaves behind space they can't refill. This video is for those who were walked away from, disrespected, ghosted, or made to feel like an afterthought and are now ready to become unforgettable, not by proving worth through words, but by turning absence into gravity. This is how to make them miss you badly after they thought they never would. The reason walking away hits harder than any emotional outburst, argument, or carefully crafted message is because it defies every emotional blueprint their ego was counting on. Most people who disrespect you or suddenly lose interest do so from a place of assumed superiority. They expect you to react in ways that confirm their emotional leverage over you. Whether it's pleading, over-explaining, trying to fix what they broke, or proving your worth through anxious pursuit, they subconsciously rely on you to play a predictable role, the one who still cares too much. That role is what protects their pride. It allows them to tell themselves they had no choice, that your emotions were too much, that you weren't what they needed, or worse, that they were the ones with higher value. But when you calmly walk away without explanation, without protest, and without trying to clarify your worth to someone who chose to disregard it, you collapse the entire narrative structure they were depending on. You leave no emotional openings for justification, no fuel for their ego, and no proof that you're still emotionally tethered. Instead, you leave behind a vacuum, a silent absence they didn't plan for and can't easily label. At first, they'll pretend to be unbothered. They'll play it cool. They'll distract themselves with noise, new people, temporary highs, the illusion of freedom. But emotional silence is not neutral. It's unsettling, especially when it comes from someone who once gave them warmth, depth, and attention. Your absence becomes a psychological puzzle they can't solve. They begin to wonder why you haven't reached out, if you still think about them, if they meant as little to you as you seem to mean to them. The more questions go unanswered, the louder the echo of their own guilt and confusion becomes. And this is the part they never anticipated, you not needing them to fix anything. Because the moment you walked away without attempting to reattach, you positioned yourself as someone who doesn't beg to be seen, doesn't plead to be respected, and doesn't linger where they are not valued. That absence forces introspection. It triggers a slow emotional decay in their inflated sense of control, as every confident thought they had about your dependence begins to rot. And if you've ever given them something meaningful, emotional safety, authentic care, unique presence, then your disappearance won't just sting, it will haunt. Because they'll realize what they gave up wasn't just a person, but a mirror that showed them who they could have been at their best. Your calm departure becomes a reminder of their emotional immaturity, their inability to value what's rare in real time, and their failure to meet you at the level you stood on with quiet strength. The longer you stay silent, the heavier your absence becomes, until one day, the very person who dismissed you starts scanning every room, every notification, and every thought for traces of a presence they once took for granted. And that's when they start to miss you. Not when you were chasing, not when you were explaining, but when you walked away with the kind of unshakable self-respect that makes people realize you were never the one who needed them. They were the ones who lost something irreplaceable. Most people think someone starts missing you the moment you leave, but the truth is, they don't feel your absence until it starts to cost them something emotionally. That cost isn't immediate. In fact, many people walk away from a connection convinced they made the right choice, especially if they believed you'd still be emotionally available on standby. They might even feel relief at first, convinced they dodged discomfort or avoided responsibility. But missing someone doesn't begin with your exit. It begins the moment your energy is no longer available for free. The moment your name stops appearing, Your validation stops flowing. Your presence stops reassuring them. That's when the emotional void begins to grow. And this void isn't created by the mere fact that you're gone. It's created by the fact that you're not reaching back. No texts, no story views, no subtle signs that you're still hoping for reconciliation. That's what triggers the shift. You see, attention is a form of emotional currency, and most people don't realize how much of it they were receiving from you until it suddenly stops. When you were available, they could take their time, push boundaries, disrespect you lightly, even ignore you, because your energy kept showing up. But now, it doesn't. Now they feel the weight of your absence in their nervous system. They begin to realize that their jokes don't land the same, their day doesn't feel as full, their confidence doesn't feel as stable, because you're not there to affirm it anymore. And the kicker is, they'll start to miss you in private before they admit it to themselves. It begins with random thoughts, emotional flashbacks, brief moments where your name pops into their mind, and they'll try to push it away. But the more they suppress it, the stronger it returns, because your silence created a vacuum and their mind can't help but try to fill it. The memory of you becomes louder than your presence ever was. They start checking your social media, but don't interact. They bring your name up in conversations subtly. They compare others to you without realizing it. And the reason this phase hits so hard is because the silence isn't just silence anymore. It's rejection of their ego. You've stopped feeding their need for attention, and they feel that deprivation viscerally. That's what makes them miss you badly. It's not just about missing the good times. It's about missing how they felt in your presence, the way your energy buffered their insecurities, the way your attention filled their emptiness. And now that buffer is gone. You didn't just leave. You stopped responding to their subconscious pull. And the longer that emotional withdrawal holds, the more they spiral in silence, not because of what you said, but because of what you no longer give. The real trigger that makes someone miss you isn't just silence. It's the combination of silence and transformation. If you walk away and stay the same, they'll assume they still understand you. But if you walk away and evolve, if you level up in ways they didn't expect, you become emotionally unrecognizable. And that unfamiliarity is deeply unsettling for someone who once thought they had you figured out. When you start glowing differently, when your energy is no longer anxious but composed, when your presence isn't centered around getting them back but building yourself up, they begin to feel like they lost access to a version of you that no longer exists. That's when nostalgia flips into regret, because now every old memory of you is competing with the upgraded version of you they no longer have access to, and the contrast stings. When they left, they thought they were leaving someone stuck, someone who would wait, someone who would hurt quietly and be available when they returned. But what they find instead is someone who didn't freeze in time, someone who elevated. You stopped performing for their attention and started performing for your potential. You moved from emotionally reactive to emotionally grounded. And that growth isn't just attractive, it's painful for them to witness, because it exposes the gap between who they assumed you'd always be and who you actually became without them. It forces them to question whether they ever deserved you to begin with. And the more you elevate, the more emotionally expensive their decision to let you go becomes. Your glow-up isn't about revenge, it's about rewriting the narrative of who you are. You're no longer the person they could breadcrumb or overlook. You're the person who doesn't need to be chased, because your life radiates such peace and power that your absence becomes self-explanatory. The moment they realize they were replaced not by another person, but by your own self-worth, that's when they miss you in a way that no message can soothe. Because deep down, they don't just miss you, they mourn the version of themselves that could have grown with you, but chose comfort, ego, or distraction instead. And now that version is gone. What's left is a memory they can't reach, a feeling they can't replicate, and a person who outgrew their ability to return. That's the kind of missing that lingers, not loud but sharp, not obvious but unforgettable. The fourth layer of making someone miss you badly after they disrespected you or walked away is understanding the role of emotional contrast, because people rarely miss you. They miss how they felt around you compared to how they feel now. Most don't even realize they've taken emotional comfort for granted until they're left with emptiness or inconsistency in its place. When you remove your energy from someone's life, you strip away a stabilizing force they didn't know they depended on. And the reason this hits so hard is because it's not always immediate. In the beginning, they may feel relief, freedom, even excitement at the idea of escaping emotional accountability, but over time that freedom starts to rot. The random hookups feel shallow. The conversations lack depth. The attention from others doesn't hit the same, because it wasn't about how perfect you were. It was about how safe, understood, and emotionally nourished they felt when you were around. That feeling doesn't come around often. And when they experience the emotional contrast between your energy and everyone else's, that's when it hits. They start comparing. Not just mentally, but physiologically. The same nervous system that once found regulation in your presence now feels agitated, anxious, unfulfilled. You were the calm in their chaos, and now that calm is gone. That contrast becomes the emotional trigger that turns absence into longing. Because now, even if they don't consciously admit it, their body remembers what it felt like to be around you. How their confidence subtly elevated, how their anxiety quietly lowered, how your presence created space for them to be seen without performing. And when that feeling can't be recreated, it becomes a craving they don't know how to satisfy. They might try to distract themselves, suppress the urge, chase temporary highs, but the contrast always lingers. You're not just gone, you're irreplaceable. And the reason they miss you isn't because you're unavailable. It's because they're realizing that even with access to the world, what they lost in you had a deeper emotional value than they could admit when they still had it. You were the calm their chaos didn't deserve, and now that the silence has settled, the emotional contrast is what cuts deepest. There comes a moment in silence when what they thought they escaped from begins to look like the very thing they now long for. And this is where the emotional weight of loss finally settles in. It doesn't happen when you walk away. It doesn't happen when they first distract themselves or post like they're thriving. It happens when life becomes quiet again, when no one texts them with genuine care, when their highs feel shallow and their connections feel performative, and suddenly the thought of you returns, but this time with gravity. It's not about missing a person anymore. It's about facing the emotional aftermath of treating something meaningful like it was disposable. And that realization can't be undone, because once someone recognizes that they pushed away someone who would have stayed if only they had respected the bond, every future connection is haunted by comparison. This is when the silence stops feeling like a break and starts feeling like a consequence. And that's where your power is cemented, not in your presence, but in your absence that can't be undone. You didn't just walk away. You gave them a front row seat to their own emotional sabotage. Every time they remember how they felt when you were around, they're forced to acknowledge how they let their ego, fear, or pride get in the way. And it's not the kind of guilt they can resolve through an apology. It's the kind of guilt that festers because they know deep down they weren't pushed away. They pushed away someone they secretly wanted to hold on to. And now the only version of you that exists is the one in memory, the one that smiled without expectation, gave without manipulation, stayed calm in the storm, and loved from a place of strength. That version can't be recreated because it came from a moment in time they didn't appreciate when it mattered. That's what makes them miss you badly, not the surface-level chase, but the irreversible emotional cost of letting go of someone who didn't need to leave, but finally chose to. The final stage that makes someone miss you badly is the point where your silence evolves into self-mastery. When your life begins to speak louder than your words ever could, and your growth becomes undeniable, not out of spite, but from peace. At this point, you're no longer holding space for them in your mind, your heart, or your future. You've shifted from seeking closure to embodying clarity. And that clarity radiates in everything you do, in how you move, how you speak, what you tolerate, and who you attract. You no longer respond from pain, you lead from power. And what creates the deepest emotional regret in someone who disrespected or discarded you is not just realizing what they lost, it's realizing they no longer have a place in the reality you're creating. Because here's the truth most people never prepare for. The person they took for granted is gone. But what hurts more is that you don't want them back anymore. Not from pride, not from revenge, but because you've genuinely outgrown the version of you that would have settled for crumbs. You don't flinch at their name. You don't check for updates. You're not waiting, hoping, or watching. You're building, creating, and attracting what aligns with your healed self. And when they finally try to return, because most do in some small way, what breaks them is realizing that the door isn't locked and it's just no longer there. You don't need to reject them. Your silence already did. Your absence wasn't temporary, it was transformative. You didn't just move on, you evolved beyond recognition. And now the version of you that once accepted disrespect no longer exists. That's what makes someone miss you on a soul level. Not because you're holding back love, but because you reclaimed it. You gave it to the one person they never expected, yourself. And in that choice, you created a future they can't follow you into, because it was built without them. In a world where your peace is the priority and your energy is earned, not given. If you've ever wondered how to make someone miss you badly, remember, it's not about revenge, it's about recentering. You don't need to force anyone to feel your absence. You just need to live in such a way that your presence is unforgettable and your silence becomes louder than any words you could have said. The moment you walk away from disrespect and turn that pain into power, the game shifts. You're no longer proving your worth, you're living it. And the more you heal, the more undeniable your value becomes. So don't wait for closure, don't hope for a reaction. Let your evolution speak for itself. And if this video gave you strength, insight, or clarity, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment on what hit hardest, and share this with someone who needs a reminder of their power. You weren't meant to be forgotten. You were meant to be missed by the ones who didn't know how to keep you.